The man is back. Jake Crain from Crain and Company is our guest. Good evening, good sir. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. Excited to be back on. You guys are killing it, and I must say the hat's pretty dope. I'm liking the fit.
Yeah, melon.com/AYS. Use that promo code 30% off. Jake, I'm a hat guy.
Hey, I
You
am
know?
too. You know me. You know me.
Yes.
I've worn a hat more than I haven't, but no, I'm liking it. I'm liking it.
Well, I tell you, I'm not just saying this because they're paying the promotion, but I swear to God, this is the most comfortable hat I've ever worn in my life.
I believe it. I believe it.
Melon.com/AYS, 30% off that promo code. Jake, let's get right into it because I think that, look, me and you talk a lot of college football throughout the year, not just regional or when the season's here. But yesterday, Brian Kelly had some pretty choice words in reference to the transfer portal. I'm going to leave it open-ended to you. I guess, what are your thoughts on what LSU head coach Brian Kelly said yesterday about buying players?
Well, first off, Blake, I got a ton of respect for Brian Kelly. I do think he's one of the best head coaches in the country. I think he gets a bad rap. He's run into three of the greatest teams of all time. And he's going to get it done at LSU. I firmly believe that. But since I do hold him in such high esteem, and I think he is a very smart guy, I think he's a very smart CEO as a head coach, which you have to be. I was surprised at the way he answered that question. I thought we would get a little more coach speak. I think there's some times where coach speak is needed. And I always used to ask myself when I was in it, is what I'm saying going to help or hurt what I'm trying to do? And again,
Right.
I'm not trying to fault the guy for being transparent, but the way he worded it, I think the way that, and we're all going to defend, whoever we're a fan of, we're all going to defend our guy, right? That's typically what fans do. That's why fans short for fanatical. But the fact that he's out here talking about, just come to LSU solely on the love for LSU is somewhat of a pipe dream nowadays. Let's be and this happened before NIL. Guys were getting paid before NIL. Everybody knows that. If you don't think your team was paying players, then you're wrong or you're living under a rock. Now it's just out in the open. But to be in the market to get quality players, especially at up front, where I think people don't realize how much these guys actually go for up front. I think I saw 650 to 800,000 for a legitimate interior defensive lineman.
Right.
It's just not realistic. And you've had this problem for a long time. What it sounded like to me was an excuse. Now, multiple things can be true at once. You can love LSU and also want to get paid. Like both of those things, because we know money talks in the business you're in the business I'm in college football, being an accountant, working at a grocery store, money talks at the end of the day. And when other people are offering money, you have to be able to offer that type of money to be able to compete in the market. It just is what it is. Now, if he would have come out and said, and some people took it this way, but I don't think this is what he meant. If he would have said, listen, we're not going to overpay for a player that I don't think is worth the money just to get a player, I would have said that's exactly right. Just like I'm not going to overpay for a car just to get a car. I'm going to check the Carfax. You're worth what you're worth. But to me, this is a problem I don't understand. I know LSU has money. I know they have money. Just like I know Auburn has money. Just like I know Bama has money. Anybody that doesn't think these programs have money are so out of touch that the vault is very deep. But how in God's name are we sitting here in 2024 and LSU is having to make excuses for not getting defensive linemen? I don't recognize you guys anymore. I don't. LSU is not an offensive juggernaut type school. This isn't USC. This isn't some sort of finesse. We're going to be really good on offense and try and outscore you. Lincoln Riley is not the head coach. I grew up every single season when Auburn would have to play LSU, praying to God that our team would just make it through the game because LSU had killers on defense. Right. Killers. This is the most awkward thing to watch. The respect around LSU's defense used to be so high that they would strike the fear of God in people when they get off the bus. I know Brian Kelly knows that, and I think Blake Baker knows that. I think that was a hell of a hire, and he's going to figure it out. But how are we sitting at this point in 2024 where LSU's having to hope and pray for interior linemen? They ought to be lining up in spades and wanting and LSU should be able to get players at a discount because of what that defense should be. I don't recognize you guys anymore. It's so awkward. It's like finding out your dad can't fight or something. It's just weird to look at. LSU's got to get back to when you take the field against them, you're just hoping that you make it to see the next day instead of seeing if we can just score 45 points a game against an LSU defense. No more excuses. No more of this. No more of that. Go line up and kick somebody's teeth through their throat. I don't care what it costs. You got the money. Don't overpay, but pay. And I know he knows that.
You know, Jake, what's interesting is everything you said, I 100% agree with. And I'm with you. Like, if you don't want to pay a kid what the rumor was of $1.5 million because you don't think he's that kind of player, I get that. Even though the NFL, you know, this is an LSU-centric show, literally the Bengals went out and paid for 2 tackles and they overpaid them to protect their franchise. I get that. My whole thing is, look, you saw Auburn get to and Philip Blitty and Isaiah Rakes. Those guys didn't go for $1 million apiece. Simeon Barrow goes to Miami. He doesn't get $1 million. Texas gets the white kid from Arizona. Texas, he might have gone for $1 million. Who knows what they pay guys. My thing is that you knew on January 15th, which lines up to the portal being activated, and this spring window that you needed that position. And, Jake, you say this all the time on your show, and I love when you say it. Let's not act like teams aren't tampering, right?
Yeah.
And you know that this has been an issue, right? And why I'm not trying to say, hey, go tamper, but in a way I'm saying, like, hey, it's the way that college football works now. So I want to ask you this. Now that they don't have interior defensive linemen, my analogy has been Blake Baker's got to be Michelangelo, and I'm not talking about the Ninja Turtle. Like, he's going to have to be Picasso in how he paints defense. What do you think that a team like LSU does if they don't have those guys in the interior? Can they get away with it, number one? And schematically, how do you get away with that?
Well, it puts you in a tough position because, again, just like we talk about, the offensive line is the heart of the offense. It's the engine of the offense. It's the same thing for a defensive line, whether you're talking about exterior or whether you're talking about interior. Every defensive coordinator in the world would love to be able to line up and just rush for whether it's run or pass and be able to operate. Because if I can't do that, I have to rob Peter to pay Paul somewhere. Right. And it's not just pressures. It's not just having to blitz guys. It's having to stunt the front. And you know this, Blake. It's having to slant more. It's having to play more games up front, which sometimes that will work out. You will disrupt people in the backfield. But just like blitzing, if it gets picked up, you don't give up doubles, you give up home runs. Right. So now Blake Baker has got to rob Peter to pay, at least on paper right now, unless some guys step up and some guys develop and find a way to get it done. But assuming that hypothetical doesn't work out, now Blake's got to reach for the linebackers. Now Blake's got to reach in the secondary to bring guys, to manipulate things just to be able to survive. That shouldn't be what the cake is made out of. That should be the icing on the top of the cake. Right. That should be the candles on the top of the cake. But Blake, it goes back to my main point. LSU's identity has changed so much, and you can blame who you want to blame. You can blame who you want to blame. But their identity has changed so much that you're now out here not able to get quality defensive linemen. I will go back to who LSU really is at their core. They are a physical defensive team that has freaks on offense that can make the plays when they have to. But now they've become Ole Miss, old Ole Miss. Let's be honest. They're old Ole Miss right now. Really good on offense, elite on offense, awful on defense. Just hoping to God you can outscore people. And when you play at this high of a level, whether it's the SEC, whether it's the Big Ten, whether it's the ACC or Conference USA, the best utility is versatility. You beat teams with balance. It keeps you on the beam because whether it's basketball, baseball, football. The offense is not going to operate at its highest efficiency level every game. You have to be able to win in multiple ways or dribble with your left hand. There may be some games, I go back to Joe Burrow's team, one of the greatest offensive teams that I have ever seen in my life. But there was a couple games, the Auburn game, where the defense and the special teams had to come up and win a game for you. We see this in basketball. The Warriors didn't shoot the three well every game, but the games that they didn't, they were able to find ways defensively. They were able to find ways rebounding. You are playing an unbelievably dangerous game, and it should make every LSU fan sick to their stomach that you had that offense last year and couldn't make the college football playoff because you couldn't stop a nosebleed in a nurse's office. And now you feel like we're going to have to recreate the same thing offensively, which is not going to happen. As good as Garrett Nussmeier is, and I think he's an NFL player, as talented as LSU is on the offensive line, and we know they've got Cirque du Soleil on the outside coming in every single year, it feels like that offense isn't going to be able to recreate that. And if they're not able to recreate that and the defense is just a little bit better, then you're not going to do what LSU expects to do. So I think this all goes back to who you really are. And LSU has gotten away from that, and it needs to change.
You know what's funny? You brought the correlation of LSU becoming the old Ole Miss. You know, we're about to see this year what really works. Is it going out like Ole Miss did and paying for dudes to come in there? Because, look, we got to make a run here, and we can make a run. And they go and spend a shitload of money defensively to be better. Or, hey, look, we're just not going to overpay him, Brian Kelly. I think that's going to be interesting when they face off. Last thing in reference to this, in a big picture, okay, like a whole big picture of what Brian Kelly said, do you think that this statement can help college football in the long run, saying, hey, man, like, you think it's crazy? I'm telling you, it's ridiculously crazy. I don't know if it does. Saban's done this multiple times. Multiple big-time coaches have done this. But does a statement like this continue to enforce that there needs to be regulation or something that needs to change?
Well, you know, we can wish in one hand and take a dump in the other and see which one fills up faster. Like, that's great that you want that. Listen, I think one of the most underrated aspects of Nick Saban was his malleability even when he was at the top.
Right.
And for example, you remember him, the hurry up, no huddle. He was complaining about it, bitching and moaning about it all the time. Realized it's not going to change. So instead of just complaining about it, taking the Dabo route and just complaining about it, I am going to become the best at it. We're just going to become the best at it. And if you allow it, then that's fine. It's like Trump says about the taxes. They're like, oh, well, you didn't pay this amount of taxes. Well, guess what? Change the rules. I'm smart. I'm being smart. I realize I'm either evolving or I'm dissolving. So at some point, if you're Brian Kelly, as much cachet as you have, as good of a coach as you are paid to win. That's what you are paid to do. No LSU fan is going to sit here and feel sorry for you if you're 7-5 and it's because, when we didn't pay for an interior defensive lineman. I bet LSU would find a way to scrounge up enough shekels if you're sitting there at 11-1 and you may have overpaid for a couple interior defensive linemen that ended up helping you in the long run. Maybe they're not first-team All-Americans. Maybe they're not first-round draft picks, but they were good enough to keep you balanced and keep you on the beam. I guarantee you LSU fans would rather have that scenario, and you could find a way to whip up the money to be able to make it through. Just look at the media. It's not like people are going broke in college football right now, and it's only going to get worse. So if your complaint is, oh, well, this isn't good for college football, well, guess what? You think some of these other coaches care? You think Lane Kiffin cares? You think Hugh Freeze cares? You think that Steve Sarkisian cares? They don't. That's fine. We'll pay them.
Right, and that's the whole point. And look, you know, Florida State, I mean, ask Mike Norvell if he regrets paying Jaden or Jared Verse or Braden Fisk. Clearly he doesn't. I mean, and no. Jake, there comes a point where, you know, I think about it like this. You know, I'm a Yankees fan, and you're a Braves fan. Well, Braves go and make a trade for Matt Olson, right, and pay him, giving him a massive extension. Why? Because they need to win, and they're going to do what they need to do to win. So I think that the model of paying players that can – Jake, what if we're sitting here and LSU's 9-2, and I told you, hey, Jake, LSU for sure is going to have 9 wins. I do think they're good enough to get there because their schedule is very favorable. But your swing game is Ole Miss. By the way, they ran for 317 on you last year. Oh, by the way, those 3 interior defensive linemen you had in that game aren't here anymore. So is $1.5 million worth winning that game and getting to a playoff? By the way, Ross Dellinger reported the other day, hey, schools are going to be making 20 to 25 million just for being in round 1. And could you imagine what Death Valley would be like at night, round 1 of a playoff game against Penn State?
Yeah, it's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. It's like walking to the chamber. You're just waiting for it. Here's your pregame meal. Here's your last meal. Hope you enjoy it. We went to Outback. We got it.
Right, and it's not going to bode well. So I think that there are a lot of ways to skin the cat, and I guess let's see what works. Jake, let's continue on some college football talk here with you. I appreciate you joining us. You said something the other day about Oregon, and it really caught my attention. I want to circle back with you on it. Mm-hmm. Is Oregon going to push through this year? Because they are loaded.
Well, yeah, listen, my whole thing was Dan Lanning. If you look at the 2 dominant conferences, what separates them? It's up front, the SEC
right.
and the Big Ten. That's the difference. That's the reason. Dan Lanning knows that, just like Kirby Smart knows that, just like Nick Saban knew that, just like anybody. I don't care if it's from the NFL to Friday Night Tykes. I don't care what system you run. If you're good up front, it can work. And Dan Lanning basically built an SEC or a Big Ten team in the Pac-12. They were more Big Ten than they were Pac-12.
Right.
And he wasn't the first one to do it over there. You know who did it first? Kyle Whittingham. And
right.
Go look at what Utah did. What was the difference in Utah and everybody else? What was the difference in Oregon and Washington, whose offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, who had NFL-level defensive linemen, right? They were able to make the playoff and elevate regardless of how talented Caleb Williams or some of these other guys were. But when you look at Oregon last year, they thought the offensive line, you lose your offensive line coach. You lose 4 starters on the offensive line. Hell, they were finalists for the Joe Moore Award. We can talk about Bo Nix. We can talk about Bucky Irving. We can talk about Troy Franklin, and they're all great players. But Oregon was able to do what they did outside of the 2 losses for a combined 6 points to Washington because they were better up front. And now look at what they have coming back. You did lose the Powers kid to the draft as center, but you basically returned everybody else. And on that defensive line, you're really good on the edge, and you were able to get guys through the portal, like McCauley from Houston that was a second-team All-Big Ten player. But the mindset of Oregon, what Dan Lanning has brought over there culturally is that I don't care what we do, but we are going to line up and kick your ass up front. So when you're going to Iowa in November, or you're having to play Wisconsin up there, are these Big Ten teams that are built with linemen and there's a little bit of frosting on the outside, they are more prepared to come in there and not only survive, but thrive. You add Dylan Gabriel, that's great. But you look at them in Ohio State. I don't know how in the world, after seeing what Michigan has lost and everybody else I'm not worried about, that Oregon doesn't play Ohio State twice, that they don't play them at home in Eugene during the regular season and then in the conference championship game. And people say, oh, Dan Lanning hasn't won the big game. Dan Lanning hasn't won the big game. I heard the same thing about Kirby Smart. I've heard the same thing about Steve Sarkisian. And eventually you don't until you do. And at some point, they will break through. And I think it's this year. Don't be shocked because people forget. This Oregon team is playing Ohio State at home.
Right.
At home. And before that game, you go to Oregon State. I know it's a rivalry game. It's the Civil War, whatever. But it does come down to personnel, and Oregon State doesn't have it. Outside of that, this will be the first big-time test for Dylan Gabriel at home and Oregon to be able to make up for what happened last year against Washington. Everybody talked about Georgia not making the playoff. Everybody talked about Florida State not making the playoff. Oregon's as pissed as anybody. And when you're pissed and you're good up front, that makes for a damn good football team, Blake.
You know, the only thing, Jake, the interior of their offensive line, okay. They have 2 tackles they went and got. Okay, they're going to be first-round picks. Mm-hmm. Okay, like, no doubt. And I think, Jake, we were doing our breakdown of them a couple of days ago. I forgot Evan Stewart was there.
Yeah.
Completely forgot that Evan Stewart was going to be a receiver. Oh, by the way, they have other dudes all over the place. Oh, that D-line's really good. Oh, well, shit. What did Jake, we don't think about them. Because I think college football sometimes is so Southern-centric or Midwest-centric, we forget about what they are doing at Oregon. I got to get to two more things with you here, but I want to go to Auburn very quickly. Jake, I broke down Auburn the other day, and tell me if you think that I'm wrong here. Now, I'm not complete with it. I think that their front seven might be one of the best in the SEC, not named Georgia. I think that they're there, and I think when you look at them on paper, Jake, they're returning 25 sacks and then adding another 15. Everybody wants to talk about Hugh and how innovative he is offensively. Jake, I don't know if defensively they're not going to be an issue.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, and Blake, you know this, and your viewers know this. It's about depth. This game is a battle of attrition. And when you have depth, whether it's the offensive line or the defensive line, but especially the defensive line from a pass rush standpoint, from a run stopping standpoint, it's almost like it turns into hockey a little bit. I can go empty the tank more because I know the guy behind me can come in and operate at a high level. Auburn hasn't had that for a long time. And the only way that you can bridge the gap between the Georgias and the Alabamas and the upper echelon of college football is up front, and it's through depth. We always say on Crain and Company, it's not about your first 22. It's about your first 65. You need at the very least, 7 offensive linemen, preferably 8 or 9, to be able to survive and feel good about yourself through a 12-game regular season and a postseason. Defensively, you need about the same, and guys have to be able to do different things. But if you're a guy like Jalen McLeod, who I think is very talented, was beat up last year, there wasn't a whole lot outside of you that wasn't young like Falk who could go get the quarterback. So every time Auburn would get in third, stop them on first, it's 2nd and 8. Stop them on second, it's 3rd and 9. And a passing down, Auburn couldn't get to the quarterback. And when they got there, they couldn't get him down. And I don't care how good you are in the back end, you can't cover guys for 6 seconds in this league. It's just not going to work. You may get lucky and figure out a way a couple times, but in aggregate, throughout the year, you're not going to be able to survive. I would much rather have a lot of depth and a really good defensive line and an average secondary than not a lot of depth, an average defensive line, and an elite secondary. That's not the way that football works. So for the first time in a while, I actually feel good about the depth on the offensive line and on the defensive line. And it's amazing how the rest takes care of itself. There's a lot of wide receivers running around that can play. There's a lot of safeties running around that can play, and running backs. There's not a lot of guys that can go up against SEC offensive tackles, beat the tackle, and get down a Jalen Milroe or somebody like that. Those guys are worth their weight in gold. So I do think, and when you add it with the schedule, look, going to Bama's a nightmare, going to Georgia's a nightmare. But I think 8-4 could really be the floor of this team, especially if they handle business at home and they beat Oklahoma week 5 when Jackson Arnold and the Sooners come to town in his first road SEC game. But you got to have the Cats up front. And finally, I think they do.
All right. McLeod, to your point, you brought him up. How about this? He got hurt last year, still was tied for first at Auburn with 10.5 tackles for loss.
He can play, Blake. He can play. He's got a deep bag. He's not just a bull rush guy. Now, you don't just want to run down the center of people, and Auburn's had a little bit too much of that. But he's a guy, again, that can empty the tank. Hey, let's get him out. Let's put another guy in there that can hold serve. It used to be, oh, God, here come the twos, that are built like Lizzo or just you look at him and you're just like, there's no way. Like he's
The comparison I gave was that Florida team, maybe not as complete talented, but that Florida team 07, 08, 09, when back in the day, they can run their second team out there, and it wasn't the same, but they weren't getting outclassed.
Yeah, well, there's a reason you're second team, but that doesn't mean you're not better than they are. Like,
Right.
that's the whole goal of this game, is to accumulate talent so you're not out here having to play 65 snaps. And by the time you get to the fourth quarter, you're having to chug pickle juice and drink mustard.
So true, man. So true. They are deep. I do think 8-4 would be a standard, but I guess, and this could go down a whole rabbit hole, Peyton Thorne. Jake, here's my thought. I think I sit in on an island with this. How many quarterbacks are we going to see come into a system in 1 year and be below average and then explode? If Peyton Thorne has 25 touchdown passes, hypothetically, okay, Jake, he will be the 9th guy in the transfer portal that's going from one school to the next, had a bad year one, Jaden Daniels, to some people's extent, and then exploded. I'm not saying he's them, but I think that there is something to be said there in reference to a second year of being in a system. What are your thoughts on Peyton Thorne?
Yeah, well, stability and comfortability, going to a new place, right? Playing in a new system, and a lot of it's terminology and chemistry, right? The terminology is what changes. A lot of people run the same stuff; they just call it something different, and then having to build that chemistry with guys around you. And look, Peyton Thorne didn't have what he has now around him, right? So it wasn't like Auburn was just, rolling with great wide receivers and skill players and just an incredible offensive line. But right now, if we're being honest, Peyton Thorne is just a better looking DJU. That's what he is. He can run it pretty well. He throws it good every now and then, but he can't make the routine throws routine. Now, I do think he has the ability, Blake, to do that. But when you look at a guy like Jaden Daniels, I do think that Peyton Thorne has taken a lot more high pressure snaps than Jaden Daniels has. And I'm a firm believer in, if you show me who you are enough, I'm going to believe you. But I don't think, and I've said this multiple times, Peyton Thorne does not have to be Batman. He just has to be a really good Robin. Just be a really good Robin. Get the ball where it needs to go. Because one thing that I don't think people talk about enough, and I think if you were in the coaches' meetings and in the players' meetings, you would find this out. I don't think his decision-making was very good last year overall, whether it be in the pocket, whether it be being able to scan the whole field or on the RPO, which is something, if you're Peyton Thorne, you cannot be a bad decision maker and an average thrower. He's a good runner. He's a sneaky runner. He's a very sneaky runner.
90+ yards against Georgia.
And that's good. That's good. But you can't survive that way, right? And he's got to stop staring at the pass rush. If you go back and watch the A&M game, he looks like me watching The Conjuring for the first time. Horrified. So
he was scared, yeah.
Again, having help around you should help with that. But man, we're getting to the point now, like, you've played a long time. Either you've got to or get off the pot, and I hope he does. And I'm rooting for him. And Hugh Freeze has a way with quarterbacks, and going into your second year, that's great. But if he doesn't show it early and his decision making doesn't get better, then I don't think we're going to see that come to fruition. But I've been, doing every superstition I know to make it happen, Blake. I'm doing my part.
I feel that. His timing was off, too. That LSU game, I mean, timing was a massive issue, which if it's fixed, it's not, who knows what happens. Last one for you. Jake, I think it was over like 3 million impressions on Twitter in reference to your comments and thoughts on Deion Sanders and Shador, what happened. Now that it's been a week since like all of this has happened, I guess, have your thoughts changed? Or not really thoughts changed? It's a bad way of asking it. What is your ultimate conclusion about what's going on there?
Well, I think there's some nuance, and I think we've got to be able to separate a couple things. Number one, telling a player that his best interest to play and for his career is probably to transfer is something that happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. Now, you don't see it on a documentary everywhere. It doesn't get put kind of the way that Deion puts things, but I would much rather have a coach. I think it's a lot more player friendly to have a coach sit me down and say, look, Jake, if you want to play, you're probably going to have to transfer, right? As opposed to saying, no, man, you shouldn't transfer. You're definitely going to play just so you can keep a third string guy there to string along in case two guys get hurt. I
Right.
think that shows more love than anything. What I don't like is when you then go on Twitter and bash a kid, and I'm talking about Deion and Shadur, honestly, but you go on Twitter and then bash a kid for the world to see. The first thing I think is fine. It's totally fine. And players are in the business now. You want it in the business? There's two sides of the business, right? So if I can sit here and tell the 16-year-old working the cash register at Chick-fil-A they're not doing a good job and you need to do better, you're going to get fired, then I should be able to tell an 18-year-old, hey, you probably should leave if you want to play. If you don't, you're not going to play, or you're not living up to what we're paying you. That prepare them for the real world. But then going on social media is a bad look. That's where Deion went off the rails. And then Shadur, listen, you can think that. You can tell your buddies that behind closed doors, and you know what? You may be right. But what a stupid business decision. What an arrogantly stupid business decision when you just see what happened to Spencer Rattler for a documentary that was made when he was 17 years old, a guy who's overcome a little bit of mental adversity, as I call it. So, again, the sentiment at the beginning, I totally understand, and I think he was being kind to him. And if you don't transfer, then that's on you. Reps aren't, it's a privilege, not a right. Okay. So like, that's not the way this works. I'm paid to win. I'm going to try and put the best roster I can together. But the way it ended was classless, in my opinion, and immature. And I think Deion, honestly, and some people won't agree with me, that's okay. I think behind closed doors, he's probably not too happy that he went on Twitter and did that.
I fully agree. Jake, players get cut. And players
processed. You remember that, Blake?
Right.
Nick Saban processed. Here, gray shirt or blue shirt. Okay, you're not as good as we thought you were. Bye. That's before the transfer portal freedom.
Right. I don't have a problem with that at all. But here's the problem that I have with Deion and have continued to have. He goes on Twitter and says, I got time today. Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't have time and bragged about you not having to go in-home visits to recruit. Well, you had time to go get paid $1 million plus to do an Aflac commercial with Nick Saban. So are you in the best interest? Is it in Colorado's real best interest for you doing what you're doing? You can't, you got to be able to go in. Jake, you and I both know this. If we were high school players and Deion Sanders walked in our home and said, I want you at Colorado, it weighs different than other coaches coming in our home saying, I want you. Right. And so that is the big disconnect. And it feels like, and maybe I'm wrong, Jake, I don't think how many months until December 7? I don't think he's here after that. I think he's gone.
Yeah. Again, we don't make our predictions till the end of fall camp, but I think Colorado's in trouble. And I think it's going to start with North Dakota State, who's going to line up and run it right where you're the worst. In-home visit. Let's tackle the in-home visit thing first. That, just like you said, that should be a huge advantage for Colorado.
Right.
Deion Sanders walking into your living room and having that way more than other coaches should be a huge advantage for you. But what upsets me about it is, and I guess maybe upset's not the right word, what perturbs me.
You?
Yeah, or aggravates me. That sounds better than perturbs. It's on French when I say that. What aggravates me is that I don't care if you're Deion Sanders, I don't care if you're Donald Trump or Joe Biden. You are asking for my most prized possession, my child.
Right.
My child. And it's a respect thing that you come into my house, you eat the food that we prepared, whether you like it or not, that's part of the process, and you sit down in my home and explain to me why I should let you have my most prized possession in the world, the thing that means the most to me, for at least 3, maybe 4, now, maybe even 8 years, the way it's going, with as long as you can play now. But like it's a respect thing. Where I think Deion's problem is when you think the way that Deion thinks, that's fine as a player because you can go out and do it. Deion's biggest strength was his confidence in himself, which you need at that position when you are playing. When you are coaching, it is a totally different animal. Not that you're not confident. Not that in that meeting room you close the door and talk your shit. That's not what I'm. But when you air it out like he does, it comes off a lot different, and you don't have control over it like you do when you're playing. That's where I think the disconnect is happening with Deion Sanders, the coach. And all of this hype and hoopla, it's great when it's going good. But when it's going bad, that's when it really, sunlight's the best disinfectant, right?
Right.
You got to play North Dakota State week 1. You've got to go to Nebraska. You've got to play a pissed off Colorado State team. You're not. And you're in kind of a bad position because the way that you've acted, even though you only won 4 games and you're still not very good up front, you're no longer the hunter. You are the hunted. You have lost that moniker, even only after winning 4 games. So you're in a precarious spot, and you find out what people are really about when it's not going good, whether that's Deion, whether that's Shadur, whether that's anybody else. That's when it's at its toughest, and I don't think Colorado's prepared for that.
I fully agree. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Fully. All right, Jake Crain, Crain and Company. It's always a pleasure to have you, buddy. I'm glad that you've been here and we got to talk. I was going to try to keep it around 30 minutes, but we
never can keep it. Whether it's me interviewing you or you interviewing me, it's because it's good stuff, man. We make good music. It's like Drake and Metro used to be.
Well, Drake's making some music. Apparently, he won some rap battle. I haven't listened to it, but apparently he won some rap battle.
Yeah, I know nothing. I'm just hoping to God Auburn can get off the field on 3rd down.
Hey, man. Hey, maybe I'm very bullish on them. I'm not saying this because you're here. I said this by myself. Yeah. I'm very bullish on them. When you can get after a dude and you can stop them from scoring, I mean,
yeah.
Hugh's gonna scheme some stuff.
Well, the best part is, as an Auburn fan, I'm already dead inside, so it can't get any worse.
I feel that, but look, man, it might get better.
Yeah, please. Hope you're right.
All right, Jake Crain and Company. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see y'all soon. Peace.